This week on Household History, we'll address the ways our ancient ancestors used sleeping aids and how books came into our collective conscious. Warning, this episode will dive into topics during the sleep aid segment that may not be suitable for an underage audience. Viewer discretion is advised. Some people need them and others don't. Sleeping aids are arguably safer to use in current times than they've ever been when used as directed. But how did our ancestors get to sleep when they tossed and turned at night? And when did we start doing studies on sleep patterns in order to make the much safer alternatives that we use today? The earliest known sleep aids were sleeping potions, and the ancient Greeks and Egyptians primarily made the potions out of opium poppy extracts. While not exactly the most family-friendly way of sleeping, the Greek god of sleep, Hypnos, is often shown with a poppy flower. This wasn't exactly a safe method of inducing sleep, as even in the original Wizard of Oz books, the poppy flower was known as a poisonous one. Juice of the poppy contains opiates, from which certain pain medicines and other destructive drugs are made. However, ancient Greeks and Romans knew of other herbal sleep aids. In roughly 300 BC, the mandragora, or bark of the mandrake, was used, as were the seed of an herb called henbane, which is currently used to treat spasms of the digestive tract. Up until roughly the 19th century, plant-based sleep aids and heavy drinking combined with drugs were primarily the only type of sleep aids, or sedative hypnotics as they're also referred to. As a side note, sleeping habits also greatly differed from how we perceive it today. It is most common to have a single 8-hour marathon of continual sleep in order to achieve the amount of quality sleep needed to be a healthy member of society. But this wasn't always the case. The Industrial Revolution brought with it strict time schedules and waking up around the same time or even before the sun rises, and working all day continually, sometimes into the evening hours. Before this revolution, people generally slept in 2 blocks of 4 hours with an hour or 2 in between. Virginia Tech history professor Roger E. Kirk heavily studied sleeping habits before the Industrial Revolution and discovered that the biphasic or segmented sleep was a very common way of life. One thing that should be remembered, too, was that there wasn't any electricity around. People of the time didn't have bright screens or lights in their face all day every day, and so when the workday wound down and day turned into night, people's circadian rhythm took over much more easily and seamlessly than it does today. This makes one question whether sedative hypnotics were as highly needed as they are today. Through the 19th and into the 20th century, chloral hydrate was one of the major discoveries in the sedative hypnotic field, one that is still used occasionally today to reduce anxiety and produce sleep before surgery. It was first synthesized in 1832 by a German chemist, but wasn't introduced into medicine until 1869, 37 years later. While it certainly worked as a sleep aid, producing results in as little as 30 minutes and lasting upwards of 8 hours by putting users into a deep sleep, habitual use led to addiction, something that was noted in medical literature of the time. The current wave of sleeping aids was heavily researched and tested from the 1950s and is still studied today, with safer alternatives being stocked on store shelves regularly. One popular sleep aid of the current day is melatonin, which is actually a hormone secreted by our pineal gland. It was isolated and researched by an American physician from Yale University School of Medicine named Aaron B. Lerner and his colleagues. While sleep is still currently being researched and new ways are being developed to help us all sleep better, it is understood that melatonin responds to the perceptions of light and dark by the retina of our eye, and also plays a role in various functions of our immune system. Healthy sleeping habits can go a long way in terms of our health and happiness. So if you have trouble sleeping, most over-the-counter sleep aids are a much safer route to take than what our forefathers had before us. As with anything, consult a doctor before trying new medications of any kind. They're practically everywhere and have been that way for eons. The construct of books haven't changed much over the last several hundred years unless ebooks are considered, but even then the concept remains exactly the same. What was written in the first books ever made, and how did ancient civilizations document things in a collection of text before books were primarily sheets of paper bound together? Traveling back to the 3rd millennium BC, clay tablets were one of the only methods of record keeping of any kind. It is generally believed that the clay tablet was used very heavily in Mesopotamia, which spanned the distance between the Persian Gulf and the Mediterranean Sea along both the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Earlier forms of writing do exist and date as far back as 5000 BC, but the meaning of these early engravings aren't quite understood, and there's very little evidence that these began a writing system that would be understood by a wide range of people from the time. Many sources point to writing systems becoming coherent around 2600 BC. The State Library of Victoria in Australia currently houses a clay tablet that dates back to roughly 2050 BC. This tablet records the delivery of sheep, goats, and lambs, and dates back to the 10th month of the 46th year of a king named Shulgi of Ur's reign in Mesopotamia. You can find several high-res photos of the clay tablet by visiting their website. The link is in the description. Another early record-keeping material was papyrus. Dated around 2560 BC, papyrus scrolls have been found along the Red Sea coast that describe the last years of building the Great Pyramid of Giza. These papyrus scrolls are the earliest evidence of papyrus. The scrolls are also the earliest concept of books, as scrolls were made up of sheets pasted together that rolled out horizontally, and text was separated into columns. The title of the scroll was indicated by a label attached to the outside of the scroll, and most scrolls of the time consisted of prayers, sacred texts, and historical information such as the reign of Ramesses III or the Book of the Dead from the early 2nd millennium BC. Parchment began its way into production around the 3rd century BC in the Greek city of Pergamon, but did so slowly as it was more expensive and more time-consuming to make. Because it was made from the skins of animals present at the time such as sheep, cattle, and donkeys, it was a more solid medium allowing the text inside to be easily conserved over time, and also allowing the author using parchment to erase mistakes, something that couldn't be done on clay tablets or papyrus. The book as we know it today started taking shape with the creation of paper, which had been used in 2nd century BC China for wrapping and padding. It was around the 3rd century AD that paper had become a widespread material for writing, and in the centuries to come, paper eventually became used as toilet paper, which we'll be discussing in a future episode, as well as square bags that protected the flavor of tea, and by the 7th century, used as a paper currency. The Middle Ages marked a dark time in our history, but with it came the modern-day book. The scroll was replaced by what is called the codex, and it features a collection of text attached at the back of the paper. Tables of contents and the index was created as the codex became more popular, as did the separation of words and modern-day punctuation, making silent reading possible. While woodblock printing had been available for many years before, it wasn't until the mid-15th century with Johannes Gutenberg's printing press that it became a much easier and much less time-consuming way of making books. Book printing at this point became a real type of business, requiring an income to sustain its production, and because of this, books now came with a much lower price tag, making the distribution of books much more commonplace. With the lowered price and the sheer amount of books being pressed, early Europeans, specifically in Scotland, experienced a type of information overload. Students were exposed to a vast variety of books and became easily overwhelming for the general public, as books weren't as prevalent up to that point. Another major invention of the time that sped up book production was just before 1820 with the introduction of steam printing presses. With the discovery of electricity, more and more information was available to us on electronic devices, and ebooks are becoming the easiest way to read in the current time. If you have an idea of something you want us to cover on the show, leave a comment below or email us at householdhistory@gmail.com. You will be mentioned if we choose your topic for a future episode. Thank you for watching.